I believe this is your floor.
This was a delight. When it comes to homework, I'm not going to complain if the homework is, well, you have to watch Christopher Reeve being Superman. I haven't watched Superman 2 probably in 2 or 3 years, but it's been a while. And I sit there going, yeah, there's plenty of problems here. They're even in this movie that I love, and a movie that is widely considered one of the greatest or most satisfying sequels.
Yeah.
This still doesn't hit the highs that the first one does, but it is a solid sequel, and it really feels of a piece, primarily because they filmed them all basically, at the same time.
Most of it, right.
Most of it. But man, the more you know about the production history and what happened, the more when you watch the theatrically released Superman 2, you can just see the seams, and you can just see where the sensibilities of a Richard Lester, who I'm not going to dump on, the stuff he's done, I love it. Even the stuff he did for the Salkinds, I love Three Musketeers and Four Musketeers. Those are a lot of fun. But Dick Lester was not the guy for this job. It's just he was the easy get. And he didn't feel beholden to be Richard Donner's clone. He decided to do his shots like Richard Lester would do. And man, those stand out as being like, oh, I don't want this.
Break.
And waiter, can you take this out of my stew? Can you remove this element?
Yeah. And also, what about the speed the guy was going at? It seemed to be no more than about sort of 15 miles an hour. Can you do that much damage in 15 miles an hour?
When you hit a brick wall, yes.
Okay.
There is some stuff that's actually pretty good, surprisingly. I mean, thinking about, we can always point at the made up superpowers that he threw in this.
Oh boy.
Like, I guess he was just like, well, why not? And it's true. I mean, most of Superman's powers are kind of ridiculous on the surface of it, but at that point there was a certain set of powers that had already been canonized in the comic books.
The thing that drives me crazy about that and the cellophane S, which is another big like, what the and then the magic kiss. Almost anything we can point to that you're going, what? The problem is that his established powers, the things we already know he can do, or they can do, as in the Kryptonian villains, they could have used those there. There's nothing they do with their special powers that are better or different from something he could have done with super speed or, heat vision or whatever.
Right.
There's all kinds of stuff where you're like going, yeah, that was just why. That was just why.
I remember you and I were picking apart that showdown in the fortress where all these things happen, where there's that thing or they go flip. It looks like they're teleporting.
Yeah.
And I remember you and I were saying, well, maybe that's like the flat, like sort of like super speed.
Yeah,
like the
super
Flash.
speed.
Superman knows how to be in two places at once because he's moving really quickly. But then they kind of do away with that because then there's this statue for him that falls apart.
And there's also him talking to Lois, which at super speed, he might be able to leave an impression of himself there. But when he's like going,
I used to play this game at school. Never was very good at it.
And then she goes to hug him, and I'm like, and then it's like, okay, I don't know what they're accomplishing here, and it's weird as fuck.
Wrong again, Zod.
But yeah, let's kick it off now. I'll ask right at the top, and for those of you who are not aware, I can't imagine that anyone watching this isn't aware. But 30 years after the release of the theatrical film, Warner Brothers basically allowed Richard Donner to get a hold of all of his stuff that he had shot, and they did a separate cut, which is as close as he could get to this is what I would have done. And yes, I'm including some of the stuff that Lester shot, but it was going to be in mine anyway, at least. So it's not totally jarring, but it is a different beginning, ending. Some of the plot is different. There are a lot of different scenes, including the reveal of the identity. Anyway, so do you have a preference? That's what I'm asking. Which one do you think?
I'm really kind of down the middle because as Michael Thaw, who was the editor that Donner worked with on this, it was really Michael Thaw did all the work on that edit. And he did a great job considering they were given a meager budget and like a limited period of time to say, okay, go do whatever you want to do with this cut.
Right.
And he was really more limited. I mean, Thaw had said in interviews that there was more that he wanted to do that Donner said, nah. He kept begging Donner and Mankiewicz to come up with a new ending. There was even a stand-in actor for Lois for that last shot where she's typed. That's a Margot Kidder lookalike. It's not Margot.
Gotcha.
So he may have had other scenes that he was hoping that he could shoot if they would just write him something. Just give me something to do, and we'll do a different ending. But there's stuff in Lester's version that I prefer, and there's stuff in the Donner cut that is clearly superior. That it makes me wonder why Lester even took it out, or there's some scenes that he trimmed down really tightly so we could fit in his stupid like they have a wide selection.
Oh yeah, that's and the guy losing his toupee, the lady with the wig.
My perfect version of what's available would be a blending of these two.
Pretty much. I mean, I think the story flows more organically, logically in the Donner cut, because what they're doing in the theatrical release is, it's fine. It's very episodic, but starting with the Eiffel Tower segment and all that, and then they're at the honeymoon thing and the Niagara Falls, and you're like, okay. And they really have to dance around so much when they couldn't use Marlon Brando, or they could, they just didn't want to pay him.
Yeah.
So they have to do so much dancing around stuff that they make up a bunch of nonsense that in the Donner cut, it's not necessary. It does move more logically, and you don't have to have his mom show up and that be the thing. And, the flying backwards in time thing ends up in the Donner cut again as an out. It works, except for it does make the tag of him going back to Alaska to beat the guy up. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, well, that's a remnant of them. Clearly, that was not, the ending was going to be different. They weren't going to turn back time again. It had Donner and Mankiewicz been able to go back.
But it actually did. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know what the original Donner script, how it ended.
And I was trying to figure this out. This is a whole kind of side tangent here. But let's get this out of the way, because this has been driving me crazy.
And we are the kind of people that will admit this stuff drives us crazy.
Yes.
This stuff matters is the subtitle of our podcast.
Some people watching probably have a much better knowledge of this, because I have not read any books about this. I've only watched documentaries and read interviews and things.
Yeah.
So what we know is that the original plan was that Lois was going to die at the end of Superman 2. Hey, Chad here in the edit room. I was wrong about this, and I've since learned that it appears to be a common misconception that when they moved the end of Superman 2 to the end of Superman 1, that meant that Lois was supposed to die at the end of Superman 2. However, that doesn't appear to be the case. The draft of Superman 2 that I found has the ending pretty much as we see it in the Donner cut, with Superman turning back time, apparently just because he felt sorry for Lois. So just wanted to clear that up before we proceed. So I don't know what that original ending was. The other important part is that they were going to film both films at once, as you mentioned in the last episode. That was something the Salkinds had in mind from the very beginning.
Because it was their standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
That's exactly how they did the Musketeers.
Yeah. So at some point in the midst of production, they said, okay, let's put Superman 2 on the shelf or the back burner for now. Let's just concentrate on getting 1 done. And that's at some point they decided, okay, well, we'll move the end of 2 to the end of 1, just in case we can't finish 2. I guess it was one of the reasons why. So that's why we get the spinning time back at the end of that movie. You would think that the remnants of what they had shot for 2 would show what that original ending that Lois was going to die, but it doesn't. We see in cut scenes and also stuff they used in the Donner cut, Lois survived the whole thing. Yeah. And not only that, the villain survived. You see them getting hauled away in one very brief shot. You see them being led to the Arctic police, right? As them and Luthor are being taken to jail or into custody or something. And that's another interesting thing, because a lot of people say, "Well, Superman killed Zod in Superman 2," and I'm like, "Well, actually, he didn't. It just looks like he did."
To tell you the truth, even as a kid, I never, because it's vague. But even as a kid, I never thought he killed them. They've been turned human and vulnerable, and they go down those chutes. To me, that's like, okay, but the fortress, easily those chutes could lead to an internal prison or something else. And I'm sitting there going like, we don't know what happened to them, but I never for a second thought like, dude, he just off those mothers.
Yeah, and I did find a script. I don't know where the script dated from. That's why I just found it online. That is basically, it's not exactly the same as the Donner cut, but it's very close, and it does have him turning back time at the end.
Yeah,
That's where you have that shot of Perry White with the toothpaste, and
Yes.
and
Yeah.
Lois typing. And we saw that there's that alternate footage that Donner had shot of her after she had forgotten about what had happened, and say, "Oh, give me pizza,"
Yeah.
And Clark say, "I'll pay for the whole thing." He goes, "Oh, you're real super, you know that?" And he goes, "Oh, wait, oh no, that's fine."
Yeah.
So he had already undid everything.
Yeah.
In that version that they were shooting. So it's like, wait a minute. So were they going to turn back time twice, or was that the remnant of the original turning back
That's
time?
what I'm saying. I don't.
But it wasn't
know.
because she was killed, obviously.
No, it wasn't I don't think it ties into the original reason, right?
Yeah.
Basically, the events of Superman 2 in the Donner cut never happened because he goes back so far that even the shattering of the Phantom Zone doesn't happen.
Yeah. They go back off into space.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously the reveal of the identity, the Night of Passion or whatever it is, or actually possibly they were screwing for a week, because when they show up in Alaska, I mean, they're like, "What's going on the TV?" He goes, "Where have you been, dude?"
Yeah.
These Kryptonian dudes that took over the world. Yeah, so let's talk about theatrical cut, the classic Superman 2, which both have this problem. Sequels have been around for a long time, to some degree, but it seems like sequels then, they needed to show you a recap, and okay, yes, this is before home video and things like that. But really, who was going to Superman 2 that didn't have some idea of what happened in Superman? So we open with you basically watch the first movie.
Yeah.
In little chunks. And
previously on.
Yeah, previously on. This happened. And I was just amazed at how much there was. I mean, and I was like, wow, that's easily 14 minutes possibly of another movie before this one even starts. That's kind of a problem. So basically we catch up, and everything is rosy. Clark's back at the Daily Planet being Clark, and Perry wants him to do a profile on terrorism because some terrorists have taken over the Eiffel Tower. And he's like, "What? Oh, goodness." He's like, "Why don't you have Lois write it?" It's like, "What? Because she's there. I sent her." And so he flies off to Paris. Again, here's the question is, we've seen him fly through time. So the idea that they're trying to build tension, because we see Lois doing all the classic Lois stuff of trying to sneak past the police to get onto the Eiffel Tower just as the terrorists are releasing the hostages. But then she's going to basically climb onto the base of that elevator that goes up. So they don't know she's there, but she's going up to get her scoop. But I love the fact that, and we keep cutting back to Superman flying, like, got to get there, got to get to Paris to save Lois. You're like, dude, you could have been like, "See ya, Perry." Hi, Lois.
Right.
So anyway, she, again, Margot Kidder.
She is great. She's really great in this movie. I mean, she was great in the first one. She's really good in this one.
She's really good in this one, and she has so much, extra stuff to play, because her reaction to the reveal, and also the first thoughts of, I don't know why I never saw it before, but you're clearly Superman, all that stuff, and she's so good. Heartbreak. So anyway, he flies there, and they drop the elevator that has the bomb on it. The terrorists themselves are like, we just screwed ourselves.
Yeah,
60 seconds, it's about to blow.
Oh, sorry. One thing I want to mention before we move on.
Please do.
This scene where she's on the bottom of the elevator, facing down, and she starts trying to spell something to calm herself down. Because we know she's a bad speller, so something about concentrating on spelling helps her with anxiety. So she's like, Nobel Prize.
Capital N.
Yeah.
It'll be a prize. That scene, I don't know why that part of her dialogue stuck with me so heavily when I was a kid.
Well, one thing that, I mean, obviously the charm and the intelligence and the just determination, that's a big part of Lois. And of course she plays that. But one of the things that she's also really good at, because Margot Kidder was a very good actress. But she plays that I'm in over my head, and this is quite possibly my death now. I mean, that scene, just like her dangling from the seatbelt of the helicopter in the first one, she sells it. There's nothing where I'm sitting there going like, and she, at this point, she even knows Superman's got an eye out for her and they're friends, but there's just no guarantee. So she looks terrified. I'm like, yeah, this is all very goofy and comic booky, but still you're like going, oh geez, oh God. Plus I have a fear of heights. So the whole thing with the Eiffel Tower, I'm like,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
fact that she's just looking at the ground, rushing up toward her as the elevator plummets. And then I also like this part. Of course, he zooms in and he's like, he does a quick, like, hey, Lois, what have you gotten yourself into kind of thing. I
Yeah.
love when she goes, she's like, oh, God, Superman. And she's happy about being saved. But then, like a good hero, she goes, there's a bomb.
Yeah,
And he
he's
goes,
like,
yeah,
"Yeah,
I know all
yeah.
about it. I know all
Yeah,
about it.
we're good.
Yeah, we're good. So he takes care of her. And then he does the, I gotta say, I know how they shot it because it's the easiest thing. They have a mannequin essentially that is Superman underneath the thing as they're pulling the elevator up. But
Yes, that
it's made to look like he's pushing it up. And I
right.
know that's the simplest effect, but it looks pretty great because then the thing is just like in like Willy Wonka, he shoves the elevator through the top of the Eiffel
Mhm.
Tower into space and launches it just as the bomb blows up. And it's a powerful enough nuclear explosion, I guess, that it sends out animated shockwaves. There are still parts of this that are so old school because it is old school at this point that there's still animation. There's still literal like
Yeah.
2D
Yeah.
animation involved. So you see like waveforms rippling through space and it hits the Phantom Zone, album cover, and it
Yeah.
shatters it.
I do like how Superman loses control briefly from the shockwaves of the explosion. He's kind of like blown
Yes,
back.
yeah,
He's like,
it knocks him back.
and he shakes it off, and then he flies off.
Yeah, you want to know how he's able to shake it off? Because he's Superman.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm sorry, man.
And I like too that when the Phantom Zone floats into view, and you see them all, they're all just looking. It's
They're like,
that's what they've been doing for many thousands of our years. They've been floating around.
or maybe only 29.
Right. We don't know. Anyway, that's another question. But it's like,
Yeah.
what their life was like inside of there, just because it seems like they can see what's happening because they're looking out.
The Phantom Zone is so weirdly interpreted, but like I said in the last one, it is refreshingly odd and alien as it should be. But I mean, my brain, I always just picture it like it is in the comics. It's just this other dimensional space, and they're kind of ghosts in there, but they can still talk and walk around, but they can't affect anything and they'll never die. Literally, I guess it's just boredom in the comic book version. But here they seem to be literally cramped into this little
Just
corridor or whatever,
tiny.
this little plane, and they've just spent years just going like, wow, look at that.
This sucks.
This really sucks. This really sucks. Oh, look, some stars. Jesus Christ. So yeah, the thing shatters and they all sort of spill out of it. I think that in the Donner version, you see them react a little better, as in they spend more time with them. Just literally, we're free, but also we're in space, we're breathing, and now we're able to fly. Like you get more reaction of like, what has become of us? There's a moon over there. Let's check that out. In this one, they spill out. The next thing is like they're on the moon.
Right.
Like, oh, okay. They got over it real quick.
Hey, you followed a bouncing ball for a while, huh?
And we have the same mission control guys that we saw.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like, I thought that guy worked for the Navy.
Function negative, sir.
But yeah, it's John Ratzenberger again.
Which one of you guys is using the hairdryer?
And it is just probably because they filmed these things at the same time. And they're like,
Right.
well, no one's going to remember that he was a naval missile command guy. Now he's at NASA wearing just a shirt and tie. But it's like, hey, Cliff Clavin.
Sorry, I must have drifted away there for a second.
Hey, I guess we should talk to those guys that have been up on the moon for weeks and everyone's forgotten about them. But it's our job to check in with them.
And they're just bored. I like that. He's like, well, he lost contact. So?
Yes, so?
What else is new? It's like,
but basically, they are at mission control in Houston, and they're talking to and I like this. It's a collaborative moon mission where
Yeah,
there's
yeah, it's Russia
a
and
Soviet Russia astronaut, and there's like a couple of American astronauts, whatever. These are nicely shot. One thing I liked a lot about it is they are doing the, it's wire work, but they're doing the weightless astronauts walking on the moon. And then I just love that like Ursa just walks up at normal pace. I just like that it's sort of like I'm immune to whatever that is. Oh, well, first you got a guy in the capsule going like, I just saw a UFO. What's it look like? A pretty girl.
Yeah, girl. And then later it's like, I thought he said curl.
Yeah.
What's a curl?
Well,
Like a
but all
comment.
that dialogue, I'm like,
Yeah.
really? We needed to leave that in?
Yeah.
We need that? I mean, the movie's not oppressively long, but you could have shaved off minutes here and there.
Well, yeah, the Donner cut does take that line out, I think.
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
curl.
The Donner cut also, again, I was so happy to see, though there is one shot of the guy on the roller skates being blown backwards. I was
Well,
like,
yeah.
okay, I guess you got to leave him in. So yeah, the Kryptonian villains set down on the moon first, and they're like, wow, this is cool, and we seem to have powers. And they just kill all the astronauts. They wipe them out one by one, and pretty cruelly, like pulling out the oxygen, then just throwing the guy into the void. Like, damn, hardcore. And Non rips the capsule apart, which is when they lose contact down on Earth.
So?
And then they're like, they come from that world, the planet Houston. Yeah. By the way, is there a reason other than they wanted more comedy that they don't actually go to Houston, but they end up in a place
East
called
Houston.
East Houston, Idaho?
Idaho.
What's the deal?
Maybe because they didn't have the budget to actually film in a big city or something.
And then all the yeah, I guess so. And then all the accents of people in East Idaho, East Houston, Idaho,
or
I'm
Texas
like,
accent. Yeah.
they are Hicks.
Yeah.
And Idaho, I'm not saying that there aren't Hicks in Idaho, but they sure don't sound like, like Southern Hicks, which they certainly do in this
Well,
movie.
except for the little boy who has a British accent.
The little boy with the British accent kills me. All right, we're not there yet. Anyway,
Can you believe this? Posing as newlyweds to expose a honeymoon racket in Niagara Falls.
okay. I know this is just a setup because they have to play that they're husband and wife. And of course, Clark's like,
Right.
oh boy, I'm going to be so close to Lois. This is going to be my chance. But all of this plays pretty well. Like the sleazy bellhop is pretty funny, and the ridiculous hotel room, and she's like, wow, nice purple, nice pink bear skin. It's like, yeah, look at this nylon.
I have to say, all of the scenes that Lester shot with the two of them are really good. Whether you like the magic kiss or not, which we'll get to later, they're great scenes. I mean, the chemistry of the two of them, the dialogue's good,
Yeah, there's comedy here. And she is slowly over the course of this, because they know each other better. They're also good friends, and she's constantly going like, "Don't be jealous. Look, you're an awesome guy, and you just need to be more aggressive and all this kind of stuff." And it's sweet. And he's just sitting there going, I can't tell her. Oh, this is driving me nuts. It does. It works well, and the comedy works well here. And it really is just about the chemistry between the two.
Where he tries to negotiate the sleeping arrangements, like,
yeah,
Mr.
He's kind of in his own way, kind of like going, well, I guess we gotta sleep together. She's like going, Mr. Smith, enjoy your complimentary couch. And he's like,
that's
all right, whatever. But so she doesn't want to be on this assignment. He keeps saying like, oh no, this is an important story because a lot of young people lose their money and then they're being scammed. But also he's just like going, this is ideal because I can be all romantic-y. And it doesn't quite work out that way. But of course we have to get to the Superman stuff. So she's out, they go out to check out the falls, and man, I gotta say, there is not a single parent in the Superman universe who is nice to their kids.
Yeah.
However, all the kids are assholes, except for that little girl. All she did was get her cat out of the tree, and her mom accused her of lying, and that's harsh. The kid here is getting up on the railing, and Clark very conveniently, because she's like going, you're kind of Superman-y today. He's like, hey kid, and the mom is like, how dare you, you're embarrassing me.
Right. And she sees him without his glasses on for a split second. So
right.
That's
she goes, I don't
think
think you can see things too clearly. That actually is very smart. The mist
Yeah.
from the falls have made his glasses
Yeah, I
totally
like that.
fog over.
I like that moment.
And he's like, "Oh, no," and she's like, "Yeah, let me clean these for you." And then she just looks at him. It's like, well, I mean, clearly that's a
Wait a
Superman
minute.
right there.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "Oh, hey kid, get off there." And that kid's gonna get beaten. And then of course the kid actually does fall. It's like, "Hey mom, take a look at me." And he's doing the catch to the rail.
Uh-huh. Yeah, honey, that's nice.
Which of course he's like, "Oh, I can't not do Superman." Luckily he was over at the food cart. And then he turns to Superman, saves the kid.
And this is one of those things in movie timing that just cracks me up because the kid falls.
Yeah.
And it's like almost a minute later that finally Superman dives down to catch
It
him.
does read like that. I'm like, those falls are enormous.
If you can't sit there and count the seconds, it's like, and the kid's dead. And now Clark runs behind the hot dog stand. It's like, wow. So anyway, but that's Hollywood for you.
But again, for a movie, especially both movies, they acknowledge his super speed, but depending on what they need for the scene, he'll either be the speed of light or he'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry I was late." What the But anyway, he does save the kid, and he sets him down, and he goes, "Oh, I want to do that again." Of course, it's a classic.
Yeah,
"I wanna do that
again.
And he just goes,
good.
"Oh, sorry, just one ride per customer," and he's just charming
It's great.
as fuck, and he takes off. And then this is a little heartbreaking. It's really well played because she just goes, Lois runs up, she's like, Superman, it's me. It's Lois. It's like he's ignoring on purpose, obviously.
Yes, because he's already weirded out that he.
But she's like, hey, it's me, your friend, and he's just gone. And then she's like, and Clark's nowhere around. But then he walks out with the hot dogs. He's like, hey, what just happened?
Yeah. I think he almost forgets to get the hot dogs too, because he lands down behind the hot dog stand. He goes, "Oh shit!" And he goes back,
and he grabs them and then just drops money. He's like,
well, and that was another bit of Foley work. You don't even see him drop the coins, but they dubbed in that sound. I went back and wound that back. I was like, "Oh, he almost stole the hot dogs."
That literally was like them going like, make sure that he paid for it.
Pays for it, yeah.
That's Superman. I love it. But yeah, so that's his cover. Then basically she's like, okay, well, I think that you're Superman. He's like, Lois, don't be a dummy dumb. I think that's the exact line. Don't be a dummy dumb. I'm not Superman. And she's like, I'm willing to bet that you're Superman. I'm willing to bet my life on it. So she jumps over the rail. He's still covering his secret identity here, which is, I'm like, that's ballsy. He's just hoping it all works. But yeah, so he uses the heat vision to cause a tree trunk.
For the first time, by the way. First time we see heat vision in these
Is
movies.
that really?
Yeah. We don't see it in the first film. So that's one of the fun things about, it's like, okay, they made up a bunch of made up powers, but they do give us heat vision finally.
That's interesting. But anyway, so he's like, Lois, grab the trunk. And she's like, I can't believe I actually thought you were Superman. And he's like, geez, Lois, you got to take it easy. And then they're back in the hotel room. They have sex. Easily.
Wait.
A really weird, I mean, because it's a 14-minute scene. No, that's good.
That's the Jones cut.
Yeah, it's the Jones cut. I do some stuff with AI you won't even believe. So anyway, she won't let go of it. And he's like, well, look, I'm your friend and everything, but I'm not Superman, and I'm sorry I can't be him and all that. And she's like, oh, well, whatever. Could you hand me my brush?
I like that line too. Not only have I lost my mind, I've lost my cum. I like that moment.
Well,
it's nice moments that you had in this movie.
Yes.
So.
And she will deliver them perfectly. Mm-hmm. But so he grabs it and then he trips. There's a couple of things in this movie that you're sitting there similar to him. Well, in the first movie, there's really no excuse for him not knowing that a helicopter is in distress at the top of the Daily Planet as he walks out.
Right.
But here, there's a couple things where he's so seemingly focused on Lois that things that are happening around them, like, gunfire or something, he is oblivious to, which I think is kind of sweet. Mm-hmm. In this case, she even brings it up. Maybe you wanted to, because why would Superman trip? I mean, he does fake clumsy things as Clark, but this is in the moment where it's going to give him away. So yes, he trips over the bear skin rug and his hand ends up in the fire. And then she sees it's completely fine. And she goes, "Oh boy, you are Superman." And then he basically does the "you got me," takes off the glasses, does the stand up, and he's like, "I can't believe I did that." She goes, "Well, I think maybe you wanted to."
Maybe you wanted to. I don't think I did.
Yeah, I don't think I did,
So-
but then again, I am horny. Yes.
Yeah.
But it's a good scene. I do prefer the Donner cut reveal. I do prefer that reveal, even though that, of course, was a filmed, screen test.
A screen test, yeah.
But the scene itself involving the gun, I like a lot better. Just the hand in the fire is like, I don't know.
You had said before, and this is a valid quibble too. It goes along with the same thing of the writers not really seeing the full extent of what his powers mean. What like him not being able to hear the helicopter, or
right.
not knowing that his father just collapsed, in the first movie.
Right.
But in this one, how would he not know that there wasn't a real bullet coming out of the gun, that it was a blank?
Well, I don't know what blanks are made of. I do know that bullets themselves, which are essentially, they are lead. The jacketing of bullets are lead.
But wouldn't he feel the bouncing off his chest? Wouldn't he, or is he just so oblivious to, he's so used to bullets bouncing off of him that he doesn't think of it
true.
anymore?
And it's possible he never even feels them. So that whole
you could argue too, like you're just saying, him kind of being distracted by the presence of Lois, that maybe he is a little bit of anxiety right at that moment.
And he is assuming that a bullet was fired. And then he's like, how could you do that? This is in the Donner cut, everybody, where he's like, if you had been wrong, you would have killed
Clark Kent.
And she goes, yeah, with a blank. Oh, it's a good dig. And I prefer it to hand and fire.
That's a little like, well, I didn't mean to do the thing.
And also it's something calculated by Lois.
Right,
so I
right.
like
That's
that
her doing it. Right.
Yeah. So, and the Donner cut also has a different thing. I'm going to prove that you're Superman.
Willing to bet my life on it.
And then he, as Clark, manages to save her.
And this is the scene I was remembering earlier. I got it mixed up. And in that scene, he does what we wondered why he didn't do in the first movie, which is...
Yeah, I mean, they completely do super speed.
All the papers fly up, which is great.
The lady's skirt flies up. The lady's skirt. But no, it's actually one of the clearest indications, other than a couple of the changing scenes, including where in the first one where he falls out of the window, it just changes in midair.
Yeah.
But it's one of the ones where they're like going, get it? Super speed.
Yeah. Just makes me wonder why we never saw that anywhere else.
Yeah. And then does the whole, like, make sure that the awning comes out. I'm using my super breath to slow her fall. She's going to bounce off the awning and onto the fruit. Here's the thing. Doesn't matter what version you watch. One of my favorite, because obviously Pimp Guy on number 1.
Excuse me.
My fave. And thank you for looking him up, by the way.
Bo Rucker. Yeah.
Bo Rucker. But this movie, if you were wondering if they have fresh melons in Metropolis, this one guy, the street vendor out in front of the Daily Planet.
Hey, fresh fruit. Hey, maybe I'm just going.
I love that they decided he was important enough to keep in both versions, because it's just all it is a like crane shot as you're headed towards the Daily Planet, and he's like going, yeah, these are freshest melons in Metropolis. Like, they're the best. And he's selling melons to somebody. I'm just like going, that would have been a fun job. That's the job I would have had.
You know what his best line though? Hey, where are you going?
Yeah, hey, where you going? Don't you want a fresh melon?
Well, no, the kid steals an apple off his cart.
The kid steals it.
Hey, where you going?
I thought it was pretty rough the way Superman deals with that apple thief. Literally throws the kid into the Empire State Building. So we're back there, and now she knows he's who he is, and she's like, wow, what happens now? And then he's like, well, let me take you to my place. Hey, let's fly to the North Pole. Then he shows her his fortress of solitude. And he's like, what do you want for dinner? Sky's the limit. And she's like, well, and then we get to see Superman go shopping.
Well, this is one thing I thought was hilarious.
Tonight, sky's the limit. Anything you want.
And he just leaves without asking her what she wants.
Yeah.
And he just comes back with whatever. Like, okay.
Sky's the limit. but you will eat what I bring you.
Yeah, I'm not going to actually ask you what you want.
It's just an excuse to show him zip around the world. He brings her flowers and food, and they have a lovely dinner.
And there's that interesting conversation they have, and I'm not so sure where I am on this. The way that Donner and Mankiewicz treated the dynamic between Clark and Superman,
I know where you're going with
is
this.
not something I'm a big fan of, because Clark speaks. I mean, Superman. He speaks of Clark as if he's a different person, and then Lois does say, like, "What? But you are Clark."
It's kind of confusing.
Not to me, it isn't.
You know, it's like, I don't really think I'm on board with that.
I'm a fan of, and I think you're the same, is that Clark is who he is. When he knew he would be Superman as well, which is in his adult years, he realizes that the Clark Kent that he is on the inside, he does have the theatrical eyes. You know, he puts on the slumped shoulders and a lot of the clumsiness and the awkwardness, but that's still him.
Yeah.
And yes, this movie is a little. This is another view, and a lot of writers, anyone who writes Superman for the comics too, they have to decide which version they like. But this version is because she says, it's like, but you know, how do you feel about being Clark? Isn't that confusing? And he goes, well, not for me, it isn't. He goes, I kind of like being Clark. And
Yeah.
it says that, and you're like going, no, you are Clark. You
Clark,
kind of like being Superman. And he goes, I kind of like being Clark most of the time. He goes, of course, even when I make myself look like a fool.
Right.
Clark.
So yeah, I don't know. And this makes me think of again our viewer Kathleen.
Hi, Kathleen.
She's one of the most prolific, just most articulate.
I've read
commenters.
and
she's great.
Very good commentary.
Yeah, love you, Kathleen. But she pointed out, and she's a big fan of the Lois and Clark show.
Lois and Clark, as in
the 90s TV show with Dean Cain.
Again, has a huge fan following.
And they're actually, some of the storylines and stuff they do in that are actually, the way they portray Superman in that show as actually, and Clark, is the antithesis, not the antithesis, but it's different. It's the version that I prefer, where there's a famous line in that series that she mentioned a couple of times, that it's often quoted from Lois and Clark, is that there's one episode where he says,
Lois, Superman is what I can do. Clark is who I am.
Yes, that's a great line.
And I'm like, that's the Superman. That's the Clark / Superman that I prefer.
Now, I don't find, any offense at this version. It's just that is the way they decided to have it stated, that they're having Superman say, Clark is this thing I put on. And you're like, well,
even though he grew up as Clark.
Yeah, it's like,
so weird.
You want to check with your mom about that? Because as far as I know, she's still alive in this movie, bruh.
And Lois even refers to him as Clark, you know, when they're together.
Yeah.
What's she going to just call him? Superman?
By the way, she's really good at, because I know I would slip up. Once you know the secret, she's really good at, like, when he's getting his ass handed to him in the diner. She's like, oh, Clark. And she never lets on. And then when he shows up after he's got his powers back, and she hasn't seen him, but he shows back up in the suit. And instead of going, Clark, she's like, Superman. I'm like, you're really good. Because once you've gotten past that disguise, I would just constantly be going like, Clark, you're back. I mean, flying. I would have been, the secret would not have been safe with me. I would have had no chill with the secret.
Right.
So yeah, there's that exchange, and then things are getting kind of sassy, but he needs to check in first with his mom.
Right.
And he's basically going, Mom, I like this chick. I really want to do her. And no, this is a connection. This is love. It's not just for fun. And so I need to check in with you. And she's like, well, in order to do that, you would have to become like them, but you'd be giving up this great gift of yours and all the stuff. He's like, yeah. But daddy gotta get some. And she's like, okay, well, there's a chamber over there. It'll take your powers away, but it's permanent. Yeah, it's permanent. You will not be able to. And he's like, yeah, okay.
Okay,
great.
thanks, bye.
Okay, thanks, bye. And it's much more delineated in the Donner cut, but he does say,
well,
he says, I've done a lot and this is the only thing I want for myself. And, it's like, why should I be denied, those happinesses and all that kind of stuff? It's solid philosophical stuff about the Superman condition. And she's like, okay, well, there's the chamber. And he's like, great. Goes in and just goes, ow, the red light bulb. And then he comes out in a shirt and slacks.
Yeah. It changes his clothes. I do like, and that is so goofy, but I do like the fading image of Superman left behind in the chamber.
It's interesting.
His hands going down.
Yeah.
I do like that touch. That's only in the Lester cut.
Yeah, where they literally separate and the Superman version fades and then he walks out in like the normal clothes.
Yeah.
That's a little goofy. It is well shot. And then he comes out and basically they go to bone.
They immediately go to bed. And here's the thing. This is the most fascinating difference between these two cuts.
I know,
because the implication that Lester has. This is why I'm saying, okay, yeah, good. I'm gonna lose my powers. Okay, thanks, Mom. Bye. Back to because he wants to get laid. That's a really awkward dynamic. Because I often think, okay, this raises the whole question of why does he have to give up his powers in order to have a relationship with somebody?
Yes.
And the lingering implication, one of the lingering implications in the Lester cut is that he can't safely have sex with a human being unless he gives up his powers. In the Donner cut, very explicitly, they've already had sex before he poses this question, which is a much better way to go. Because at that point, it's not about having sex. It's about...
And again, when he says very explicitly, like I said, it's 14 minutes of explicit sex.
Yeah. And it's not about, okay, Mom, please, let me do this so I can go and go to bed with this woman I like. He's already done that in the Donner cut. It's already happened. It's not about that. It's about the commitment. It's about the love that he has.
Yes.
Well, I do not like this whole idea of him having to give up his powers in order to have. I know it's an important for the story they're telling in this movie. You kind of have to have that beat because this is one of the reasons why the villains are able to run rampant across the planet while he's distracted with the situation in the fortress. That's why any of that happens at all. And then I do love the situation he's put in because of giving up his powers. And that moment where he realizes how horribly he's fucked up. That the worst possible thing has happened and he doesn't even have his powers, and that is a powerful, powerful moment. But at the same time, why?
I think in both versions, there has to be, they're going very Joseph Campbell. They're going very Power of Myth. And so there has to be some sort of sacrifice. And it is almost like both of them are implying that the role of Superman requires sort of like a full dedication, because in the Donner cut, as you say, they successfully get down, and then he gives up the powers because he wants a life with her, and it's a selfish wish just to be happy and pursue what all people have, the ability to find a mate and have a wonderful life. But basically, it's almost a calling, where they're basically saying it's like the priesthood. To be pure Superman, you have to basically divorce yourself. You can care for the people you're serving, but it stops at a certain point where it becomes selfish. This whole thing, both the first movie and this one, are about him trying to buck against what he's told he can't do. Because it does make Superman a rebellious figure. In the first one, don't interfere with the course of human events. And he's like, well, changing time.
Yeah.
And in this one, it's like, you can't have a human mate. You may never have a mate because you have this responsibility. And he's like going, when is there something for me? It's like, hey.
Yeah.
And I think that's nice on both sides. The fact that Lester wants it to be just so I can be with Lois, I have to give up my powers. And in the Donner cut, it's in order to serve the world, I just have to give up happiness. It doesn't mean that I can't have sex with Lois. There's some, there's that bit in the Donner cut where he's like going, this doesn't mean we can't see each other. And she's like, yeah, she realizes I can't ever have 100% of you. And a lot of the comics have done similar, jaunts or have similar conversations where it's like, I knew when I fell in love with you, I would never have 100% of you because you belong to the world and the universe, the galaxy.
And I wonder, and I don't know, but I'm wondering if this was, if the conversations that Michael Thaw had with Donner and Mankiewicz when they were working on this cut, because Thaw was like, please write me a new ending, but they wouldn't do it. And I'm wondering, because I was thinking about this when I was watching these two versions. It's like, why doesn't he rebel again? Why doesn't at the end of the movie, why doesn't he say, sorry, Dad, I'm going to be with her whether you like it or not. Of course, at this point in the Donner cut, there is no more Jor-El because he's sacrificed himself to give him his powers back.
Yeah.
But not in the Lester cut. So
No.
I
think, well, here's the cynic in me. The cynic in me is because they knew it was also a film series and it was not going to become the romantic adventures of Superman and wife. Because even in the comics, it took till the 90s that they had the big reveal and then the marriage and they now have a kid. Great. But in that, I think they were sitting there going like, no, you lose that dynamic. The Lois Clark Superman triangle is eternal. So I think they wanted to hit the reset button. And I think it was them going like, all right, they can hook up because people have always wanted that to happen. And her finding out that he's Superman, people have always wanted to happen. But at the end of it, you have to reset. So they literally do in both versions. And one way I like a lot better than the other way. It's like they have to go back to, oh, thanks for the pizza, Clark. I have no idea that we boned.
Yeah.
Then they're like, let's drive back to civilization. Plus, they're both completely mortal. How do they get from the Fortress of Solitude to an interstate somewhere in Alaska?
This is one of the many nitpicks.
Let's not worry about that.
I found an interview with Donner where an interviewer very, very cleverly asked him that exact question. How did they get out of the fortress?
He's like,
and Donner's like,
shit.
oh, I don't know. He has no idea. Because he and Mankiewicz just didn't worry about nerding.
Maybe there was a Kryptonian power sled that he was like, I'll use this.
Well, and they do this. The weird thing is that apparently there's an Arctic police force that knows where the fortress is. And so maybe they hitched a ride for them. Yeah.
What the hell?
And that's in a cut scene. But yeah, that's they didn't really think that through. It's weird.
I love the idea of maybe those guys are on duty and they're at their little, office and there's like, hello, my name is Clark Kent. I'm a reporter from Metropolis. I need some help out at the Fortress of Solitude. Superman's not here right now.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they go to a diner somewhere in Alaska, but there's a bullyish trucker who challenges. Well, he flirts with Lois first, and then Clark comes out of the bathroom and goes, sir, I believe you're sitting in my seat. And he's like, yeah, well, it doesn't look like your seat to me. And then Clark, pretty cockily, I mean, doesn't he realize what's happened? But he goes, I think someone should teach you some manners. And then essentially is a scene where, and it's very effective. It doesn't matter what version you watch, where Superman gets beat to shit by just some jerk trucker. And the scene where he just sits there going, that's my blood. He's like, oh my God, that's my blood.
And that's such a great touch to put that in the dialogue. Yeah.
He is at his most vulnerable. And she's like, are you okay? And she's worried about him. He's like going, I think you ought to maybe hire yourself a bodyguard from now on. He's like, I can't
he's just totally crumbling. He's totally crumbling.
Yeah. And it's very human. It's very good. So
and I like that beat too. I mean, that moment too, where he doesn't have any idea how to fight for real because he's never had to take a punch.
Right.
He doesn't know what it feels like. He has no idea. And the guy's just barely just elbows him. He's like,
it's probably the most pain he's felt in his entire life.
Yeah.
Because in the movie version, he seems to be pretty much fully powered up even as a baby.
Yeah.
So this isn't something where the powers came on. They were just already there.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's like going, oh, that's pain. Yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah.
When the red stuff comes out of you. Oh, yeah. I don't like that either.
He did not account. He didn't have any idea that was going to happen to him.
Nope. And then of course, to make matters even worse, while he's laying there in defeat is when they turn on the TV in the diner. And we have kind of skipped around because intercut through all of this. We're focusing on the Superman part, but intercut with all this, the Kryptonian villains have landed on Earth in East Houston, Idaho, and they discover their heat vision. Non is not so good at it. I kind of like the weird ongoing thing that's never spoken about, but I like the fact that Ursa seems fascinated with badges and all this stuff, like jewelry. She keeps grabbing people's badges and patches and puts them on herself.
And that was
kind of a neat.
That was something from the Donner footage, and Lester didn't use all of it. You see, she has. There's one scene of her pulling a badge off a general in the Oval Office that Lester didn't use.
Oh yeah, so, but she had already grabbed the CCP badge off the astronaut, and she has the
sheriff's badge,
all that stuff. So anyway, they've shown up. It's this little town. They wreak havoc.
I haven't seen the likes of this since Superman.
So the guy who plays the news reporter is the same guy in Star Wars as like, you and your sorcerer's ways.
Is it? Yeah, he's got a beard and glasses on. So you can't. Okay. Wow, I never knew that.
It was just the way his mouth moves that I was like going, that looks familiar to me.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
And then I looked him up on IMDb, and it is him. Lord Vader, you and your sorcerer's ways.
Sorcerer's ways.
Sorcerer's ways.
The whole planet Houston?
He's the one that corrects him, goes, Earth.
The whole planet Earth.
And oh god, and Terrence Stamp is he's so great throughout this whole movie. But I love that moment where he does get corrected on the Earth, and he doesn't lose his temper. He just goes,
"You may continue."
There's a lot of, this is a superhero movie from 1979, 80. And there's a lot of cheese here. But here's something I love, and this goes across the board because this is so full of amazing actors. Terrence Stamp plays this so deadly serious. There is no bit of goofiness that happens in Superman 2 that detracts, where you sit there going like, well, he's just a goofy cartoon villain. No, he's scary. He's, even with bad effects, even with a, kind of over the top and not incredibly successful, but still for its time, great superhero battle. I just never doubt that man is going to tear somebody's head off. He's so good.
Very, very subtle beats of humor that he has. There's more that Lester does with overdubs. Like he reacts to something Don does. He goes,
Yeah.
Which is, that was one of Lester's overdubs. Most of it is like when he's posing for the camera, he's kind of vainly.
The vainglorious general that he plays the entire time is just, it's so perfect. And of course, the most famous comedy beat is obviously the president kneeling, going, oh God. And he goes, Zod.
Yeah. And I do love those moments because he is so dangerous and so vicious, but in those moments where he's correcting, he's just like, oh, he got that wrong. In case you heard my name wrong, it's he's not, he doesn't get angry.
There are certain moments where you're like going, I wonder what his buttons are or where the line is, because Luther, of course, gets right up in his grill.
What am I going to do with you people? Huh?
It is always like, and kill him. And he's like, oh, but no.
Bow, yield, kneel. That kind of stuff closes out of town.
He's constantly like poking the bear the whole time.
He is. He's just seeing how far he can take it.
He can't resist. Yeah.
Oh, so good. And so they show up at the White House and they just walk in. And I do like that about super powered villains, where they're just like, people are, automatic rifling them and they're just walking, no problem. Zod himself picks up one of the rifles like, oh. And he does use it in the other cut.
In the Donner cut, with a big grin.
Yeah, he's like, oh, this is pretty cool, but I don't need this shit. They have a stand-in, one of the aides to the president is pretending to be the president. He goes, are you the ruler? He's like, yes, I am. He's like, kneel before me. He goes, okay. And he kneels down, and Zod goes, you are not the president, because no one in that position of power would be so quick to kneel.
Yeah.
And then Edward G. Marshall, with a very convincing toupee. I think they're trying to make him look like Reagan, because Edward G. Marshall was pretty much bald at this point.
Yeah.
He does a good job, again, playing it totally straight. If I kneel, will this save lives? And he goes, oh, yes, absolutely.
Starting with your own. Up to that point, that's their end game. There's nothing else for them to do, because the president has abdicated power on behalf of the entire planet.
On behalf of the entire world government.
So the next scene, we see them, they're just sitting in the Oval Office bored out of their minds.
That's actually a pretty great statement, too, because in the comics, they rarely show the villain getting what they want. Mm-hmm. And the aftermath. And then this is like, he wanted to rule Krypton, and now he's ruling another planet, which isn't as advanced, but he's like going, yes, well, now what?
Yeah, he's like,
just sitting there.
This is boring.
Doop.
Going back to when Clark sees the news report of what's going on, and he's still kind of dazed. And I love his reaction. He says it so quickly because he's like, wow. He just had the shit kicked out of him, and now he's like, what am I seeing now, Zod?
Yeah.
And I love the moment where he sees him. He already knows who he is because obviously his dad told him all this stuff years ago, right? And I love that moment. He's like, Zod.
He also saw the opening of Superman 2, which shows all of it.
But the diner guy says, he turns the TV off, and then and Clark looks and goes, here, when?
Here, when?
Just totally befuddled and like, where have you been, Mac?
Yeah, he goes, where you been? You been sleeping under a rock or something?
Desert Island. And his immediate reaction was like, yeah, I have.
He literally turns to the love of his life, who he gave up all this stuff for, and this is it. He has probably been human maybe a couple of days for the travel.
At most, right.
But he's like going, I have to go back. And she's like, you can't. I mean, I was there. I heard it.
I have to.
He goes, I have to. I've got to find a way.
Because he has to walk all the way back to the fortress by, as a human.
As a mortal man. And he's out there freezing to death.
But I love that moment. We mentioned this moment in one of the early episodes too. I love that moment where he says, I have to. And she says, well, you didn't know. It's not your fault. And he says, he knew. And in the Lester cut, he says, they knew.
They knew.
Referring to his parents. In the Donner cut, it's he knew.
He knew.
Meaning my father. I just didn't listen.
I love
that moment. I love
that moment. I mean, again, there is built into both of the scripts, because they are of a piece, that father-son dynamic, and of course that also equals God and Jesus.
Yeah.
Because they are leaning heavily on the mythology of it. It's too much so, apparently, for Ilya Salkind, the younger, which is that bit from the Donner cut that we do see when he gets his powers back. And it is much more effective.
This is how it ends for the greatest criminal mind of our time.
Luthor, still bald. And one of my favorite lines in all of the Superman films is Luthor turning to a fellow prisoner and going, and I want my Liberace record back.
And this was another difference. Lester changed that the reaction of that inmate. He's like, I want my Liberace back tonight. And the Lester cut, he goes, it's scratched.
There's a scratch on it.
And the Donner cut, he says, tonight?
Yeah, tonight?
Tonight?
And you can see that is the actual dialogue if you look at his mouth when he's saying it. Like, so Lester had to put another stupid joke there.
And it's not even... but the idea that Luthor, while he's already plotting his escape and is ready to go, he still goes, and I want my Liberace record back.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's more Otis and Luthor fun. And they're great. Again, the chemistry is still great. And so he goes, and I've got this black box. He goes, oh yeah, the black box you've been working on. Yes, exactly. So then I actually like this a lot. This is totally out of the comics. All right, Luthor and Otis, you guys are going to get in so much trouble you haven't turned your light off.
Lights out, Luthor.
And when he gets to the cell, they're in there playing chess. And he's like, well, I told you to turn it off. And they just kind of look at him and go back to playing chess.
That character actor who plays the guard, by the way.
Red leader, this is gold leader.
I don't know.
Oh, really?
That's a face I recognize. I didn't think to look who
that's
he was.
Okay.
Oh, good, I can't maneuver.
Stay on target.
He forgives you.
We're too close.
Stay on target.
Shout out to the prison guard.
Loosen up.
But he goes in, and basically it turns out it's a hologram that has a very fancy projector that Luthor had set up. And the guard's like, oh, I'm an idiot. And Otis and Lex escape in a very overly comedic way.
Very implausible way.
They're up, yes.
They escape very slowly in a hot air balloon.
I know. Otis, go over there and find it. He goes, what am I looking for? He goes, you'll know it when you see it. And he does some physical comedy like, oh, it's behind me. Now I turn around. Oh, now it's also behind me again. Oh, it's a ladder.
You're skipping a part that the Donner cut put back in that was right before this, before he goes out there. Don't go when I go.
That I would have cut out even of the Donner cut.
Well,
I mean,
that was a very distinctive thing. It's extremely silly, silly, but that is Donner and Mankiewicz humor. Very different.
It is. It's a different kind of.
It's most people would not be able to tell there is a distinction between their senses of humor.
And it also seems, again, more not improvisational, but again, you've got these two guys who are both brilliant actors, and I'm sure they were like, let's think of bits of business. And that does feel like do a little funny here. It's like, oh, we got something. So basically, it's a hot air balloon. Lex goes up the ladder. He joins Miss Tessmacher. And Otis is like, I'm coming, Miss Luthor. And he tries to climb up the thing. And here's the funny is that he's so fat. He just keeps pulling the ladder down, but he's not getting up anywhere. And then finally, Luthor cuts the ladder loose. I do like Otis just sort of waving goodbye because it's not like, I got screwed. And so he kind of goes, oh, okay, bye.
Yeah.
Kind of waves at them. And that's the end for Ned Beatty. He's like, oh, good. I'm not in the rest of it.
We never see him again.
Done.
Yeah.
And there is a good line, I think that's only in the Donner cut, where Miss Tessmacher is like going, okay, where are we headed? North. And what about Otis?
Yeah, how could you do that to Otis? Yeah.
Yeah, and he goes, well, what else is ballast for?
Yeah. Right. And that is one of the silly, very, very, very silly things because he's overweight. He's not that overweight.
No,
he even says in the first movie, he's like, what did number 200?
It's your weight and my IQ. Now think, people, think.
Dude, I'm
200's not that much. Yeah.
I'm hoping I would be able to get into a hot air balloon. So somehow, let's assume that they had that sled in the hot air balloon.
Oh, yeah. By the way, in case you don't know, whenever you see Gene Hackman in this film
from behind,
yeah. Well, when you see his face,
oh yes,
that means Donner shot it. If you don't see his face and you listen really closely to his voice,
is that all you care about? North, Miss Tessmacher.
That means Lester shot it because Hackman refused to come back for the reshoots or for completing the film. He didn't want to have anything to do with after they fired Donner. He's like, I'm done.
I gotta say, I love that was almost across the board, except for, of course, contracts, because Reeve wasn't happy with this. None of them were happy with that. They were totally loyal to Donner. Though I've read, quotes, they all really liked Richard Lester. They weren't blaming him.
It wasn't anything against him, right?
And they're like, what a gent. What a delight.
One of them did say that there was more of a family atmosphere with the Donner production. With Lester, it was more business-like. So because he was more, that's why the Salkinds wanted to give him the reins, is because he was much better about staying on budget.
It was all about budget.
Yeah.
It was all about budget, which is really disgusting that the whole thing of getting rid of Donner was just because they felt it was getting too expensive. And it was getting too expensive mainly because he wanted to do it absolutely right. Yeah. And that's what kills me, is that we have a Donner cut, but it's still not what we would have seen had he been able to actually do this movie.
North, north, north.
So in that scene on the snow speeder or whatever it is that they're on, all that dialogue you hear.
Look, it's his home. It's Superman's home.
It's not Hackman's voice. And if you listen really closely, it's this really bad impersonation. North, Miss Tessmacher, north.
Yes, there are certain places you can really tell. Most of the stuff towards the end in the fortress, where anytime you see him from behind is clearly a stand-in. Yeah. And you get a lot of like dubbed in, like, oh, I'm trying to climb down this thing. Oh, I'm having trouble. Comedy. And you're like, that's not Gene.
Never heard of parachutes?
Yeah.
So stupid.
But basically, Lex and Miss Tessmacher do find the Fortress of Solitude, and she's upset that there's no bathroom.
Why didn't you go before we left?
That was 2 days ago.
Or she can't find one. She does in the Donner cut.
The Donner cut.
Tessmacher.
He figures out everything pretty quickly, and it's real nice that, I guess, by default, anyone standing there, no matter what language they naturally speak, they're hearing Kryptonians speak to them in English.
Yeah.
But in the theatrical cut, it is his mom, and also like an instructor guy.
Trees.
A random instructor guy reading the poem, and you're like, who's that guy? Like a cousin?
Yeah.
I guess it doesn't have to be family members, but I do prefer the Donner cut with the Marlon Brando stuff. And he's like going, it's got to be the old man. Looks just like him.
Ask him where the bathroom is.
So he now has this bit of information, which is what is going to be his bartering tool when he meets the Kryptonian villains. So Clark's got to get his powers back.
Father?
And basically he just asks. He's like, can I have my powers back? No, he does look over and find the green crystal. That's what survived because the control panel blew up after he had his powers taken away. Clark finds the green crystal and he's like, "Oh, great!" And I guess that's all it took.
Well, yeah, in the Lester cut, that's where it cuts.
Yeah,
and then in the Donner cut,
it's much more explicit. Jor-El goes, "This is the last thing I can do for you."
Yeah,
Literally,
now this is really
you get your powers back. I'm dead to you now, and this place is going to be useless. But he also says the weird thing about you have now fulfilled the Kryptonian prophecy. I'm like, Kryptonian prophecy, and that
the father becomes
the son, the son becomes the father, or whatever. And you're like,
Superman Returns runs with that line.
The son becomes the father.
Then instead of just a floating hologram head, he then becomes kind of physical-ish and walks toward him. And it's I believe, the only scene that Christopher Reeve and Marlon Brando shot together.
Yeah, really early on, apparently. Yeah.
Yeah, he walks towards him, puts his hand on his shoulder, and essentially there's a power transfer.
With a David Byrne impersonation.
Yeah, he does. He did say, "This is not my beautiful fortress."
Yeah.
Lex Luthor just shows up at the White House. I guess you can just walk in now because the Kryptonian villains aren't afraid of anybody.
Right.
So he walks in, he's like, "Hey, I'm Lex Luthor. I'm the most brilliant criminal mind on this planet." And they're like, "So?"
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "You can't give us anything." And he goes, "But I have one thing that you don't have, the son of Jor-El." And they're like, "Holy fuck. Are you serious?" And it's like, "The son of our jailer."
Well, this is one of my favorite difference in the Donner cut. Literally,
Okay.
the difference in this scene. Lester cut a lot of really important beats out of this scene. If you watch the Lester cut, when he says that,
The son of Jor-El.
The son of Jor-El.
because I watched the Lester cut first, and I was like, that happened really quickly. Like his reaction is very quick.
Mm-hmm.
In the Donner cut, it takes him a few beats to process what Luthor says.
The son of Jor-El.
There's a beat. Non looks at Zod. Zod sits up in his chair.
The son of Jor-El?
I said that, didn't I?
He's like, the Jor-El. Our jail, he's like trying to process.
Yeah,
like,
he's like, "How do you know of Jor-El?"
Because at this point, they have no reason to think that Jor-El has anything to do with this planet they're on.
Yeah, exactly.
So I love that extra moment. It gives you that extra beat for Zod to kind of react like, what?
Yes.
You know, it's a much better scene because of that.
And if that was about moving things along time-wise, I still sit there going like, you
Why?
could have had that and less of the... There's all kinds of things you could have trimmed from this movie to leave room for beats like that.
Especially in the Lester cut, that whole thing of, I ain't going nowhere where I'm expected to eat fish.
Jesus.
Why was that so important?
They got a wide selection. Yeah, well, I don't want to... They got a wide selection. God
It's
damn, that
so
was
stupid.
painful. And he also says, he's the one that you've heard about called Superman. And they're like, that makes sense.
Right.
And he goes, "Yeah, but you got to work with me. We'll strike a deal." And they're like, "What do you want, Lex Luthor of Earth?"
What do you want?
And he just goes, "Australia."
Yes.
It's a great moment. This continues throughout the entire movie. They don't like Luthor, and basically will constantly say, "We're going to kill him," and then he will convince them that he is useful. And that will happen in every scene from here on.
Yeah.
And it's great Luthor stuff because he is playing it cannily. It is still a little cartoony. Luthor in this movie has stepped over kind of into a comedy part. His betrayals are, of course, dead on. But yeah, in this movie, he doesn't really have a good, beat like he did in the first one about, "But Lex, my mom lives in Hackensack." So he's not your alpha dog villain, but he manages to play against three superpowered people that tolerate him and are actually listening to him. So that's pretty good. And of course, his other bargaining chip, when they threaten him later, is like, "Yes, but you don't know his home address."
It's Superman's address. He does this really bad Scottish accent. Throughout the whole Donner cut, especially, there's more lines in the Donner cut of him doing this really bad Scottish
Well,
accent.
actually, what I think is funny, what he's kind of doing anytime he's talking to Zod, because of course Zod is this and very British, and Terrence Stamp is eating it up. there are scenes where you can tell Gene Hackman's like, this isn't the script, but Lex is going to kind of reflexively do like, so he does his own upper crusty British thing a couple of times. He's like, yes, your eminence, but, and then you're like going, Lex, it's poking the bear. The guy's like going, I'm just trying to show him I'm his equal, even though he can, incinerate me with his eyes.
What I thought was really interesting too, and it was just for a comedy beat, but in the Oval Office, when he's just about to tell him that the son of Jor-El is there, he goes and holds Ursa's hand, puts his hand on Ursa's hand, and of course she starts to crush it. He goes,
Lex Luthor's school of better.
This is great.
It is very good.
But it's like, why did he hold her hand? Because he deliberately puts his hand on her hand.
I think it is 70s male chauvinism.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it does just boil down to that. But it's very funny beat because, again, he plays it like, you will never hear me say anything against Gene Hackman's performance. Even the fact that he was not a fan himself, especially of the next time he's Lex Luthor, he was just cashing a paycheck. Doesn't matter what his feelings are. Love everything he does.
Lex Luthor.
You promised me the son of Jor-El.
And he goes, well, here's the thing. You want to get Soup's attention, mess with her, because they've got kind of a,
They're the best of friends.
And then basically it's Superman appears on the flagpole. It's a great shot, man.
There's a different line of dialogue here between the two versions.
Yeah, I do prefer the Lester line, which is,
would you care to step outside?
Yeah.
And in
as opposed
the Donner cut, it's like,
haven't you ever heard of freedom of the press?
What?
Yeah, that's care to step outside. General is much better.
Maybe he said both lines, and they just cut.
I'm sure it might have been like, we've got a couple. Just like when you're doing a TV show and the writers are there, they'll often pitch a line like, "How about this? Try saying this." So on the day, he probably could have had 5 different lines, and those were the 2 they chose.
Right.
One was probably like, "Neener, neener, neener."
Yeah.
Got my powers back. Could someone who is talented with AI create a video of Chris Reeve standing on the flagpole going, "Neener, neener, neener"? So it is a great line. And then they're like, "Oh, the son of Jor-El." And then battle.
Kneel before Zod.
Really, there's the main differences between the two cuts is that Donner took out all the comedy crap.
Yep.
So
and I am okay with that.
Yeah. And apparently I think Donner said this in one of his interviews that I think a lot, if not all of the model work that's in that fight sequence, a lot of it was done by his team when he was still in control of the production. So some of that stuff we see is Donner's footage, but most of it is Lester, which is why in the Donner cut we still have the goofy guy in the roller skates.
Yes. Yes.
This is one thing that the Donner cut. One problem with the Donner cut that he couldn't fix, because there's the footage of him, really good footage of Superman getting knocked into the Statue of Liberty's torch.
Yeah, that is a good shot.
But we still, that's coupled with the footage of Lois and Jimmy and everybody in the Daily Planet looking as if they're seeing, like, they can't see all the way down to the Statue of Liberty from the Daily Planet building.
Yeah.
So that's a symptom of Donner not being able to finish his shooting. So
I do like, I mean, it's still handled very well for its time, but it's just a very cool visual image of him getting punched into the torch of the Statue of Liberty. Donner cut gets my approval there. And of course, Donner cut gets my approval for cutting out all the dumb comedy. The guy who's in the phone booth that gets knocked over, and he keeps doing his conversation, and he just seems like he's insane. Instead of him going, "What? Oh no, I'll call you back." Instead, they have him being pushed along on the sidewalk, prone, and he's going, and I'm like, "Are you okay, sir? Are you all right?" And then the toupee, all that stuff is nonsense.
This is where Lester, as a director, kind of failed in his job. And he
did come out and say, like, in response, he goes, "Well, if I was going to direct it, I wasn't going to do what Richard Donner did, with all due respect." He's like, I like lightness and comedy, and I look for little moments. And you're like, okay, well, I didn't want that, but thank you, Mr. Lester.
Because that kind of humor is all over, like the Beatles' Help, which the
You
weaker
want
of the
it
two
there.
Lester Beatles films. Yeah. But that
You
kind of
want
humor works in Hard Day's Night and stuff like that.
Yes,
Especially.
that's
but,
why I say
but,
I will
but
never
not
come
in this
down on
stuff.
Richard Lester either, because maybe he wasn't the man for this job, but he made
No.
one of my favorite films of all time. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Hard Day's Night, you get a full pass for the whole of your career. Thank you. The fight is great, generally speaking.
It is great. There's very minor differences between the two battles.
I love the shot. That's just Zod. I mean, Terrence Stamp, he realized that he will always stand at attention with the arms behind his back, which looks badass. And he's just standing there on top of the building next to Ursa. And that's where they have the exchange about he cares. He genuinely cares for these people. And it's like pets, I suppose. I will return fire with fire of my own. And that shot where he just looks
Using
and then
heat
just
vision,
shooting
yeah.
the heat vision. It's just cold badassery where I'm like going, yeah, that isn't about badness of 70s effects. That is just great staging and an actor who owns every second he's on screen. So good. By the way, one thing I do hate is the ADR of Ursa. And I didn't know it was ADR because until I watched the Donner version.
Yeah.
But
yes.
he
exactly
does the whole thing with the radio tower and he shoves it down on Non, and the ADR is
He's caged, non.
Really? What was that for?
I just saw what happened. I don't need you telling me that. That's
Lester just could not stay away from the ADR booth. It's like, dude, calm the fuck
It's
down.
like I'm worried they won't understand what just happened.
It was just anyway. So we have to say this.
We do.
This scene, this battle is one of the things that's often pointed to as the distinction between Man of Steel, and very frequently in the comments we have somebody saying, "But in Superman 2, there's all this destruction in Metropolis," and like, dude, come on, the degree of destruction compared from this movie compared to Man of Steel, there's no comparison at all.
No,
and plus the biggest thing, as we just said, Superman's actually running around trying to save people the whole time, and then to the point that the villains use that against him.
I'm glad you brought that up.
It is a huge plot point that he cares.
I'm glad you brought that up. There are moments all the way through this battle, and I'm so glad that both directors, whoever was responsible, or maybe it was even Chris Reeve, where basically it's like every time he gets up after having been slammed between a bus and a thing or wherever he's been knocked down, every time he gets up, he doesn't look at the villains. He is checking around him. He's looking at people.
Yeah.
And obviously there's the overt stuff of like the tower falls almost on top of that lady and her baby. And she's like, save my baby. But I mean, it is just like, she's like, thank you. And he just turns and smiles while he's flying the tower away.
Yeah.
He's constantly protecting people.
And like you said, from the very first beat, because the first thing that happens is Zod goes over and picks up that piece of concrete from the building that's under construction. Yes. And Superman's first reaction is he looks down to see, oh shit, I gotta make sure.
Yes, that's exactly right. He looks down first. That's such an important thing in his character. Now we can assume, I mean, yes, this is done at a comic book level where it's fantastic. Also, the effects are limited because of the time. So they can't really show skyscrapers falling, but that would have never been their intent anyway. What they show us is a battle between superpowered beings, one of whom is actively trying to protect people on the ground below. I mean, he could have still done the thing that I always say about Man of Steel. It's like you could have moved the battle out of the city, but regardless, here,
well, he does,
we can also assume that people died. We just don't see it happening. We could assume that some of those people, especially with like Zod burning the cars, they could have possibly people might have died during this. But at the same time, this is not a movie that's going to envelop you with that. Snyder so desperately wanted to do real, like if these really godlike beings having a fight, these buildings would be falling, and there's no way he saved all those millions of people.
So he can't save all of them, so he's not going to save any of them.
No, well, he'll save Lois and then have a kiss. Oh, anyway. I don't want to get into that. Anyway. But yes, that is an important thing, and it's captured very well here. And it has a moment that, of course, Spider-Man 2 stole years later, where Superman is seemingly dead. He got totally crushed. And then the city is like, they killed Superman. Let's get these motherfuckers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cheesy, but I love it. And but I do find this is a fickle populace, because when Superman does reappear and then flies off, they're like going, he's a coward. He's flying away. He didn't even do nothing. And I'm like, hey, Metropolis, calm down. You were just picking up bats to go hit some Kryptonians.
Yeah. I do love Superman's reaction when he apparently he had been knocked unconscious, so he finally claws his way out.
Yeah,
and he looks around, and this is when he realizes this is not working.
Yeah,
I have to lead the battle elsewhere.
I love seeing the thought process too, where it's like,
because he's kind of like, oh,
that's so good.
Damn it, this is bad. Of course, it's many beats later that we realize that he figured out that Zod is so vainglorious, that he's more concerned with revenge than he is actually doing anything intelligent. So he knows that if he runs off, and this is where I kind of wonder if they didn't have this in the script, that Superman actually knew that Luthor had been to the fortress and knew where it was, because that was kind of a key part of his plan.
Well, I think he was probably, possibly if he didn't know that, it makes sense that he would take them there, but they can also probably track him. They know he exists at this point. And so I assume that Kryptonian, they can, for one thing, watch him fly across the world probably. But regardless, Luthor's going to claim, I'm the only guy who knows their address, so let's go there.
And in the Donner cut, he gets Cuba as a...
Yes. I did like that too. I'd forgotten that when I rewatched the Donner cut. I was like, oh, he gets Cuba now. That's great. So this leads up to the Act 3 climax. We're back at the fortress. The Kryptonians are there. They're like, this place is sad. It's a sad remnant of a planet long since dead. You are weak and sentimental and all that. They just...
Again, that's a line that they chose not to put in the Donner cut for some reason. It's in the Lester cut. They took that out.
The one about this
is a week. You have the one that you just said about the fortress being.
Wow, I didn't know. I may not have caught that was.
But that is like, if I was to do an amalgam cut of the two, or like a combined cut, that's one line I would definitely leave. So I like that line. Anyway,
it is a good line, and it also is a further indication that, for all the stuff about Zod in his backstory, which you don't get into really in either movie, but the whole thing about him being this Kryptonian nationalist, like this, or, some sort of our culture is above all. I like that here he's basically saying, that place, it blew up.
Yeah.
Because it is just all about him in the end, like it is with every dictator. It is always about them in the end. So he's like going, I don't even, whatever. This place has KFC. I'll go eat some fried chicken. I don't care. Krypton.
Yeah.
In fact, that he ran on the Krypton ticket. And I do like this showdown. And he's like going, what do you want, Zod? And he's like, I'm going to destroy you. And they do their weird superpower battle, and including the throwing of the cellophane S.
Yeah, which we touched on already. But yeah.
Who thought that up? I mean, who?
It makes me think of the stories I've heard of them saying that, Marlon Brando, early on in production, like trying to weasel out of doing it as much work as he could get out of doing.
Yeah.
One of them being, do I even have to be here? Could you just make me look like a bagel?
Yes.
And this story, he
goes, no, it's an alien species.
Several different people.
I could be anything. I could be a suitcase. I could be a bagel. He literally said these things.
Yeah, the Donner and one of the production, I can't think of the productions, they all tell the same stories. Like, yeah, he really said bagel. And we had to very, very calmly talk him down off this bagel ledge that he was on. Like, but that makes me think that
who says Jor-El has to look like he's a human? Why can't he look
like
he's
an
bagel?
alien? So, but yeah, maybe he could look like a bagel. We don't know what Jor-El looks like. It's like, well, actually, he's comic. People who read Superman comics have known what Jor-El looks like for decades, Marlon. But it's okay. But that makes me think that Lester was thinking like a similar thing. Like, well, he's got heat vision and super breath. Why can't he have lasers that shoots out of his fingers and all this other goofy crap?
Wow, we really missed something when he didn't direct the films himself. Can you? But Father, I want to protect them. Bring me some lox and some cream cheese, for I am a bagel.
I kind of wonder, like, when this was going on, like, did anybody say to Lester, it's like, Dick, Superman doesn't actually have that power in the comics. Who cares?
I have a feeling it is that. I mean, in the comics, he, especially in the Fortress of Solitude, he does have weird weaponry and stuff he's used, and I'm sure something as ridiculous as the cellophane has been in the comics. But at the same time, it's
in
just
this comic,
in that comic,
yeah.
Anyway, so the weird super speed zipping around thing happens, but essentially it boils down to, I'm going to kill Lois if you don't do what I want you to. I'm going to destroy every human being on the planet. It's going to be your fault. And he's like, okay. And Luther's, this I think is really funny. He walks over conservatively 10 feet maybe to where Superman is. He's like, hey, look, I think I ought to team with you. I backed the wrong horse. They're going to wipe everybody out. And then Superman's like, listen, I got this chamber over here.
Yeah.
You just get them in there and it will turn them into normal mortals. They are 10 feet away from Kryptonians who have super hearing.
Who don't hear him and absolutely should be able to hear him. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then they're like, Luther. And he's like, oh, coming. And Superman actually goes, shh.
Yeah.
Cool, man, cool. And Luther goes, that chamber over there will turn someone like you into someone like me. And he's like, oh, you poisonous snake.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, you betrayer. And they're like, thank you, Luthor. And he gets in there. Everything turns red again. Weirdly, though,
but
if you were a close viewer of the earlier part of the movie, the red lights were inside the chamber. In this part, the red lights are outside the chamber throughout the whole... By the way, I guess it doesn't work on humans at all. I'm like, wow, is Luther and Lois, are they now super powered? No. But anyway, so it ends and he walks out. He's this time not in slacks and a nice shirt. And he walks out. I was like, oh. And then Zod is like, great. Now kneel before me.
Finally.
And he does. Yeah, he goes, finally. And he holds his hand out and Superman takes it. And then you hear the bones crunching. And it's a great, I love so it's like, oh.
Yeah.
He crushes his hand. He throws Zod into a wall and he slides down into a pit. Clearly, people thought that was a death pit.
I did when I was a kid. I just assumed he did.
Yeah, and then he grabs Non.
Actually, Non tries to fly and just falls.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Non tries to fly. And he goes, oh, and he falls into the pit. That's right. And then Lois is like, she goes, oh, is that true? And then she gives Ursa a final. You're a real pain in the neck. In the Donner cut, she goes, you slag. And then she actually knees her in the crotch. It's so weird.
Yeah.
No, she does give Ursa a good punch right into her own little sliding thing of death. We don't see what happens to Luther in this version,
right?
Or the Kryptonian villains, and instead we are back at the Daily Planet. Clark is trying to talk to Lois, and she's like going, "Look, you can trust me. I'll never tell anybody." And he goes, "I know you won't." And she's real sad. And he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry." And then how about a kiss? He gives her a kiss, and there's literally Tinkerbell music that plays like, and the second they finish kissing, she kind of passes out a little. The short-haired friend who was the real bitch of the Daily Planet for like, wow, he's even bigger than Superman. That lady, she's like, are you okay? Shuts her up. But here she's concerned about Lois, like, oh, I think she passed out. Here, have some water. And then it's clear as she wakes up, she's like, oh, hey, Clark, what's up? I want a hamburger. He looks at her sadly because it's like, I had to do it. And she's totally forgotten. And she does look up and she goes to the friend. She goes, what's been happening in the world? What's new in the world?
Yeah.
And she's like, are you crazy? Don't you remember you got by Superman?
And this is
nope.
The interesting thing. Obviously, we already talked about it. In the Donner cut, they did away with that scene. And they chose to go instead with turning back time again. Not because it made sense, but just because that was the only option they had. Besides, because they really didn't want to use Lester's magic kiss. And I agree with that, but for a different reason, because apparently the reason why they didn't use the kiss, and this is said multiple times in interviews, that Tom Mankiewicz said when they were considering, okay, what do we do here? Because Michael Thaw, as I already said, was begging Donner and Mankiewicz to come up with a new ending that he could do animatics or something for, or actor stand-ins, or come up with something new, but they didn't want to do it. But the reason that Mankiewicz came up with for not using the Lester kiss was Lois, and this goes back to this weird conception they had of Clark and Superman being two different people. Said Lois should only kiss Superman. She shouldn't kiss Clark. Oh, so that's why we can't use the magic kiss. Like,
well, that's a weird reason.
What about her having no agency and her, her not being left to her as a human being, being left to actually get over this thing on her own? And you actually see the first conversation they have in the Donner cut outside the fortress after he destroys the fortress with his heat vision. She seems like she's going to be okay. She's like, "Oh, I understand. All right."
I mean, it's still emotional and it's bittersweet, but she's handling it a lot better.
And I will say, as much as I don't like the whole idea of her memory being erased, whether through a magic kiss or turning back time again, because it removes her agency as a character.
Yeah.
That scene that Lester shot is fantastic. Her performance in that scene is absolutely fantastic.
But so is the one in the Donner cut. I do find both to be really well acted, really, because they're delivering it. I just hate the same reasons I dislike I'm taking this burden from you. He's trying to do it for a good reason, but it is still taking your agency away. And and the magic nonsense of a forget me kiss. It's like, that's just dumb. It's so dumb that I prefer going back in time. His going back in time is not just self-protective. It actually does undo all the damage of the Kryptonian villains. So none of it happened in the Donner cut. Also in the Donner cut, I do like it being directly tied in that the missile he shoved out into space is what actually breaks the Phantom.
That was the original idea.
Yeah, instead of the bomb, the terrorist bomb. But anyway, so I do prefer the going back in time, even though, again, I saw it in the previous movie, just because I so hate the kiss thing. I hate it. So
and
much.
then Michael Thaw says, he doesn't really think the Donner cut, which he edited, did all the sound mixing stuff himself with Donner's and Mankiewicz's approval and supervision.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't think of the Donner cut as really, it's not really a movie. It's more like an experiment or like a really, really elaborate extra.
Oh, agreed. It is an extra. This is an alternate universe. What could have been, exactly. And I take it as such.
Yeah. So that ending is not, they all admit that's not how the movie would have ended had they actually been able to finish production as planned.
It does put them all at the same place at the end, which is basically Superman being the only one who remembers that they had that, that's painful, actually. I think that's a lot of the stuff they do in it humanizes him, which I always like, but it still ends up with him like, this is my role, this is my calling. So it does end with him doing exactly a Superman thing, which is he flies a brand new dome for the White House with the flag on top, flies it there, sets it down, and is like, sorry I was gone for a while there, Mr. President, but you can always count on me. I'll always be here. It's like, thank you, Superman. And then he flies off into space and smiles at us.
Well, then he goes, piece of crap.
Okay.
Trucker in the diner.
It's okay. That shows him as very human, because that is full on just petty revenge. Then, being a good citizen, pays for the damage.
Because he came prepared.
And the guy's just staring at him. He goes, I've been working out. All of his little Clark gestures. I mean, the man was just great. The physical stuff, like anytime he'd bring up Superman, he's showing like sheepishly, like, oh, I guess you're just so obsessed with Superman. But he always does the little flying gesture too, like, that guy, Superman.
Yeah, I love that.
He's just such a nerd. It's great.
That guy again.
Yeah, so he does get revenge on the bully, and then flies into space and smiles at us.
You said it's very petty revenge. You could look at this as very, very petty revenge, what he does with the trucker.
Oh, I don't think that's an arguable thing. What do you you actually don't think it is?
Well, no, I think it's deserved, but it is this version of Superman, it's really kind of out of character for him to do that.
Yeah.
However, if you look at, somebody pointed out, I can't remember who it was I saw this, pointed out like the very early versions, the Siegel and Schuster Superman, very early run.
Oh,
it's kind of what he did, is he would go after bullies. That was kind of his thing.
It is. Only in this case, the bully is just a jerk to people that encounter him like as he's driving truck. So, I mean, he's not dangerous. He's an asshole. So the only reason he's coming after him is what he did to him. So that makes it much more personal. But you are right. Golden Age Superman. I mean, you look at the very first thing, the very first appearance of Superman, he literally stops a wife beater and tosses him out of the window into like the East River. And you're like, damn. And that's just like a flyby. Like it wasn't something he'd been tracking this guy. No, he just like hears and shows up and he's like going, how do you feel about fighting someone your own size? And this tosses him. You're like, great. I mean, it was a common thing that he would stick up for the oppressed. So you can generously say that's what he's doing here. But I also see it as just like you're the only guy who's ever made me bleed. I'm going to punch you.
Yeah,
punch your lights out.
And it is a very crowd-pleasing moment.
It's a crowd-pleasing moment. It may not be the most accurate to the character.
Just like Zod's hand getting crushed.
Yes, exactly.
Which also... He didn't need to do that. He didn't need to crush Zod's hand.
He didn't need to do that, but am I going to complain that he did? No. No, I love it too much. So now I think we've kind of covered Superman 2, and both of us left exhausted. And I would like to end it with new lyrics to Can You Read My Mind? Okay, are you ready?
Oh, good.
Can you read my mind? If you can, I'm really sorry about that. Some of it you shouldn't see, especially the thing where I was with the thing. And then about the pants, I normally wear them in my thoughts. Can you read my mind? It's probably for the best you don't. Okay, anyway. Thank you. That'll be on my solo album. I really enjoyed this. Again, now, here's my big question as we wrap up.
Yes.
Are we going to move on to Superman 3?
That is entirely up to you, because I know that you've never seen it. This is an interesting story, because I would maybe when we do this, if we do,
you just said
if you're willing, yeah, I did. I find it fascinating that you avoided seeing those movies when they came out.
The thing is that even as a fan, even as and an avid film goer, I always I worry especially about IP I care about. I worry about Superman. And I remember the reviews, word of mouth, the second Superman 3 came out, and even the trailers, and I love Richard Pryor. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just sitting there going like, what? So as a kid, the trailers left me cold. Then the instant word of mouth and the reviews were all like, oh, this is where it fell off a cliff. This is embarrassing and bad. And I was like, okay, I won't go. And when Superman 4 came out, it was a similar situation. It wasn't because I hadn't seen 3, and I liked the premise of 4. It sounded awesome, but I could tell that the budget had dropped off. And I didn't want to be embarrassed for the character. That's weird. I know, but it's kind of like, I was like, However, let's do a poll. Like maybe next week we do something entirely different. But do a listener poll. If you guys want us to do Superman 3, I will watch it. I mean, I will. It's not like I'm religiously against it and just like dreading the badness. So I've never seen 3 or 4. You let us know if you'd like to hear us do 3 or 4, and I will take the plunge at the age of 55 and watch these movies that I have in that fancy box set and have never watched. So let us know, and I will definitely. And John is also very curious. He's like, "Are you going to do 3 and 4?" I'm like, I might, quite possibly will. As long as you hold my hand, Chad, we'll do possibly 3 and 4. Let us know if you'd like us to. Okay. Yeah. Also, tell us what we got wrong and if we're off base. Superman 2 is a flawed product in both versions, but it's the good outweighs the bad in both, and it's Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder ruling. So, okay. And on that note, it's time for lunch.
Hey, all right. Hey. We'll see you next time, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Oh, my son, I have looked upon you from my shelf where I sit with the other bagels.